Hi, and welcome to this special edition of Extra Serving, a podcast by Nation's Restaurant News. I am your host, Holly Petrie. Today, we have Sean Kennedy, Executive Vice President of Public Affairs for the National Restaurant Association, in conversation with our own Ron Ruggles. The two spoke about the new Credit Card Competition Act of 2023. On this interview-only episode, you'll hear what this act could mean for the restaurant industry, as well as a few other legislative updates from the NRA. And now I'll turn it over to Ron.
Sean, thanks for joining us. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the Credit Card Competition Act.
Ron, thanks so much for having me. I'm Sean Kennedy. I'm the Executive Vice President for Public Affairs here at the National Restaurant Association. I know you wanted to talk about the Credit Card Competition Act of 2023. Major piece of legislation. It was introduced today on both sides of the aisle, in both chambers, House and Senate, Republican and Democrat. We are incredibly appreciative of Senators Dick Durbin of Illinois and Roger Marshall of Kansas, as well as on the House side, Lance Gooden of Texas and Zoe Lofgren of California. This is legislation that would finally inject competition into the swipe fee credit card space. About 75% of restaurants right now, restaurant transactions are done through a credit card. And this is the number 3 cost for restaurants right now, behind labor, behind food, is swipe fees. The fees are going up. They're showing no signs of going down. There's some really simple solutions. This bill aims to do that.
Right now, there's a bit of a duopoly on swipe fees and who they go to. Can you explain that and how this act would change it?
Well, you've got 2 dominant credit card companies, Ron, and that accounts for over 80% of all credit card transactions in the U.S. So those transactions can only be processed on their network. So if a restaurant wants to accept those credit cards, they don't have a choice but to pay the processing fee that those companies have set up. If you're a small business, you do not have negotiating power on something like that. And so the lack of competition means that these 2 companies can effectively price fix how much it costs restaurants to run a credit card. In the past decade, the cost of these fees has more than doubled, and it's unchecked by market competition. So the Credit Card Competition Act would it doesn't get into price regulation, it doesn't get into rate regulation, but it says that the largest banks have to also ensure that a third operator can operate on their network, that they're working with a third provider. And by injecting that competition, it's going to lower prices, it's going to lower fees, and it's going to hopefully give restaurants a little bit of breathing room on their profit sides.
What are the chances for the act getting passed, given the fact that it is bipartisan legislation in both houses?
Look, we're up against a really significant lobby. The financial services lobby has got deep pockets. We are absolutely the underdog in this case. I'll be brutally honest with you, Ron. But that said, this is must-pass legislation for this industry. You know, you've got restaurants that have a profit margin of 3 to 5%, and what's eating into that and what's restricting them from investing even more are things that are out of their control, and it's out of their control because there's not adequate competition. We are joining with a lot of other small business organizations here in Washington, D.C., but it's going to require restaurant operators to get a little loud. We have an advocacy website, restaurantsact.com, that we certainly encourage people to go to. They can contact their member of Congress electronically through the website on issues like swipe fees. But this is one of our top 3 priorities for this year and certainly for next year.
What are the other 2 priorities for this year and next year?
Thanks for asking. Look, the number 1 item, of course, there is such a job shortage in this, not only in this country, but particularly for the restaurant sector. We have worked to have legislation introduced that would create a new guest worker visa program, specifically at the hospitality sector. It's not a silver bullet, Ron, but it's the kind of narrow bill that could actually get bipartisan support. And we're almost at that point. We think it'll be introduced in a few days with bipartisan support. That could actually see passage. The third priority is just the preservation of the tip credit. We've seen so many calls to eliminate it by folks that really just don't understand the restaurant industry, don't understand that restaurant operators operators and servers do really well under the tip credit. You know, the servers like the fact that they're getting up to $30 an hour in tips. We want to make sure that we don't lose that program. We don't lose that option for restaurants through federal legislation. So we're playing defense on tip credit, offense on expanding employment opportunities, and offense on lowering swipe fees for the restaurants.
Now, I know the Restaurant Association has it put its muscle behind the swipe fees, but what can the individual operators do who might be listening to this podcast?
Again, it's really to make sure we have got, here in Washington, we've got the facts, we've got the figures, we've got the policy arguments. What listeners have are the stories and the ability to say to a member of Congress, this is what swipe fees are costing me. They're not going down. This is what I would do if they were a little lower. Here's how I'd be investing. I'd be perhaps adding another restaurant, perhaps adding more tables, perhaps hiring some more workers, perhaps lowering my menu prices. What we need is for restaurant operators to share those stories and to personalize it and to make this argument relevant. So through websites like ours at restaurantsact.com, your listeners can learn more. They can stay engaged. We would love any support we can get from operators.
You also have your own podcast, Order Up. Can folks listen in there?
They can. You can access that, Order Up any place where you get your podcast, Spotify or Apple or iTunes. And then for more information on all the programs that we're working on, feel free to visit our website, restaurant.org.
And Sean, we're talking on Wednesday, June 7th. That's when
Yes.
this was introduced. What can we expect as far as a timetable and having restaurants respond to their local representatives?
This is going to be a slog. This is not going to be a sprint. This is a marathon. We need to get the way that debit card legislation went through was that members of Congress realized that this was a problem that needed immediate action. But it took a long time before we finally broke through the noise here in Washington, D.C. We have to do the same thing on swipe fees. It needs to be a constant drumbeat from whenever elected officials are talking to restaurant operators and saying, how's business? It's really to say, we're doing our best, but here's one way you could really help us. You could really help us by passing that bipartisan Credit Card Competition Act. It's making sure that that story is told and that members are coming back to Washington, D.C. with those thoughts and those stories in their minds.
And any other words of wisdom from your D.C. perch at this point?
Look, this is, I don't want to sound all negative. I'll be honest, as we talk to operators in a post-pandemic world, there's so much optimism. There's so much renewed purpose. The wins that we made during the pandemic on things like RRF or the Employment Retention Tax Credit or PPP, it's because people love restaurants in their district. They want them to see more of them, and they want to know how they can help. Washington doesn't always get things right, but we sure can try, and we're going to continue pressing. We've got a great relationship with state restaurant associations in every state, DC and Puerto Rico. We have an ambitious agenda, but together we can get through this, and we can bring the restaurant industry to an even better place in local communities.
Well, Sean, thanks for bringing us up to date, and thanks for your time today.
Hey, thanks so much, Ron.